Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on Sunday, September 22nd, 2013 at 3:35 in the afternoon Eastern Time. Now, this is a Sunday, of course, and as it turns out, it was a Sunday that uh, I was reading in church. This is the first time I've read in church this month. Of course, I had that very dense flurry of reading assignments and reading engagements during the funerals and so forth, and last month, and filled in for a couple of other people over the month. So um, I was reading with this fellow that had well, he initially had a fairly major stroke, but he must not have bumped off all that much of his brain, because he's now very functional. He's back among us, and this is something I've observed, and I find this an interesting phenomenon. There's a lot of times that when people have strokes, I'm not talking about the ones that render you, paralytic and unable to communicate and profoundly damaged, but strokes. Sometimes patients would come in and call them, a light stroke. I had a light stroke, and uh, so he's back functioning. And now, you can tell there's a little, he has a little problem with one arm, not bad, but a little bit. And although he did the whine today, now he had not done the whine a couple 3 weeks ago when he was reading. I think maybe because he, was unsteady with the holding the cup, and but in his reading today was so much better than the way he often read prior to this cardiovascular or the cerebrovascular insult. It was slower. It was more deliberate. It conveyed far more of the profundity of the passage. It's as if this layer of social presentation that sort of regimented him into presenting this very proper, organized business type face to the world has fallen away. And we're now seeing the real him. Now, as I've implied, I had some sort of event here August 16th of 2011. And I call it the Great Bludgeoning Down, August 16th, 2011. And yeah, that's where I got bashed in the side of my face, well, here, there, and broke some ribs, and probably tore my spleen. Certainly had a little bit of a leak there from my spleen, and some retroperitoneal bleeding. But soldiered through that. And but my singing, since I bashed in this maxillary sinus wall, my singing, which wasn't, quite honestly, wasn't all that bad to start with, but my singing is just profoundly better. I mean, I sound, exponentially better. And, where my nose used to get stopped up and I was snorting all the time and, blowing my nose in the manner of the Indian, as they used to say, back in the days when that wasn't considered racist and awful. Um, I don't have to do that anymore. So, but that's a result of the trauma associated with the stroke. Now, in terms of did the stroke make me, read better, uh, think clearer, more clearly rather? Um, it's hard to say. It makes me stagger and lurch around a lot more, which some people might say, well, how can you tell the difference? Because I was never all that steady on my feet anyway. Tiny feet, bad ankles, bad knees. Well, I'm getting a bit far afield from the point of what I wanted to talk about today. There's 2 points. One, I want to basically give a little bit of a précis here of our sermon. Now, our deacon gave the sermon again today because our rector is up in Massachusetts, he's now on the road back from Massachusetts from this funeral that I may have alluded to a day or two ago. And today's gospel was the dishonest steward. Make friends with the mammon of unrighteousness while you can, so that you will be welcomed into the kingdom of heaven. And then you can't serve 2 masters. You can't serve God and mammon. That's how it ends. But you get this really kind of an oddball tale about how this guy, finds out he's going to be fired, and so he seemingly suborns his master's creditors to forge their bills into new bills, so that he can report that he's collected full amounts of money from them. Meanwhile, of course, he's cut them a sweet deal. And it's very, in that little tiny paragraph there, you get basically every human motivation for actions, both good and bad, don't you? And the one point she made, she made several points that but the point I found most stimulating for me in terms of thinking about this, which I've obviously, it's one of those things you puzzle over. It's like the salt stuff, and she said that the mammon of unrighteousness doesn't necessarily mean that it's money that comes from corrupt behavior. She said it has to do with our attitude toward the money that comes from any endeavor, legal or illegal, and how we then use it to further the kingdom of God here on earth. And I thought that was a really neat idea. I really liked that. I was going to let this go, but I can't. My only critique of her presentation today would have been that she quoted from this egregious, I won't call it a Bible, because it's not a Bible. This thing by a guy named either Peterson or Peterman called The Message. It's not a Bible. It's not the Message Bible. It might say that on the title, but it's not a Bible. It's not even a paraphrase. That calling it a paraphrase, it's not a translation, at all. Calling it a paraphrase is a bit of a generous characterization. What this thing is, for example, it describes the Annunciation. It rephrases the Magnificat to say, instead of my soul magnifies the Lord, it's like, my heart is jumping for joy. That sort of thing. And I don't even want to tell you what Luke 2 sounds like in this thing. So today, she read this thing, the equivalent passage, well, two verses, which in the authorized version are very succinct. Verses 8 and 9 of chapter 16 of Luke. And this thing went on and 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 on. And, and of course it's all very, very, modern, contemporary vernacular. I'm waiting for them to bring out, maybe they'll bring out a rap message. That'll have all the liberal theologians scrambling to get their copy, won't it? So that they can appear trendy and with it. And au courant. Well, anyway, unfortunately, she chose to read this thing. And I got thinking, well, how, what would be an equivalent way something like this actually got produced legitimately rather than just trying to be trendy? And I got thinking, well, let's say there was this major nuclear war. And the survivors had to go underground and breed underground in these mines for 150 years or so. 7 or 8 generations. And for some reason, unlike the model of desert island discs and, what 10 books would you take with you, if you only had 10 books? They may have taken a copy of Shakespeare with them, but they didn't take a copy of the Bible. And so over the generations, people who had read the Bible and knew large parts of the Bible would try to convey that to succeeding generations, and then those generations would try to explain that to succeeding generations and so forth. And after 7 or 8 generations, these guys come out of the cave and they write this stuff down, and you get something like the Message. Well, of course, the text is totally corrupt. Some of the ideas may actually remain there. And it may well be that, for the first 3 generations, you're actually getting fairly accurate transmission. Now, that presumes that we are not an oral culture. Maybe after the 3rd generation, the 4th and 5th and 6th generations would have reverted to oral cultures, the oral culture practices, where you go over and over and over and over and over and over and over stuff, until you get things pretty much down word perfect. Now, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that ancient cultures were very oral cultures. There was writing, but the vast majority of people did not write. And stories would be transmitted pretty much word perfect across large amounts of time, long periods of time. And so the fact that, something hadn't been written down and then suddenly somebody writes it down doesn't necessarily make the fact that the first written example is a corrupt text, in the sense of not reflecting what was actually being said, and said for quite some time. I think the American Indians, can testify to that in terms of how they, some of these works of art that document, winter kills and winter screens, and that's the documentation, but the stories behind them have been told over and over and over and over and over, and so that they would know them. Anyway, the Message is an egregious document. And while I would never advocate book burning, if these things happen to fall into a fire, I wouldn't be too unhappy. Now, on a happier note, as my mother said, let's talk about happy things. Oh no, we can't talk about reality and truth. No, we have to talk about happy things. Well, this actually happens to be reality and truth, and it is a fairly happy thing. When I walked up to the church door today, there was a little tiny beagle type dog. Well, he wasn't a little tiny. He was maybe, he was probably 30 pounds. You know, he wasn't one of these little tiny miniature dogs that they're going to run around and like they're deranged and yap. You know, he was I say he actually turns out it was a she. Uh, Quasi beagle hound type dog, and it was tied. It was tied to the doorpost outside the church, and had a bowl of water. And I thought, somebody brought their dog to church, and they can't take it into the church because it's not a service dog, and they're going to collect it. And it was in shade and it had water, and it was very friendly. I spent some time, rubbing its belly and talking to it. And actually, it got excited and knocked over its water bowl. So we got a hose by the side of the church, filled up the water bowl again. And, well, of course, whose is it? Whose is it? Whose is it? What's the story? Well, it turns out that another woman who basically has several dogs and so forth, she had looked into this. Now, apparently, this had a collar and it was tied with a piece of nylon rope about, long enough that it could move around to its pan of water, but not lunge at people or interfere with people coming up to the church door. I mean, it could lie down and it could walk and it could sit. It had one of these little nameplates. I had a couple made for our first dogs. You had my name and address and phone number. And this one had her name and a couple of phone numbers on it. And people called. This woman, I think, and her son called these phone numbers, and they got voicemails, and so they left messages. And then, since they didn't get called back right away, they thought, should we take it to the animal shelter? And as it turns out, the dog belonged to a college student renting an apartment right across the street from the church. And apparently, they didn't answer their phone because they were out looking for the dog. And when they got back, they saw these messages and immediately came over to the church and collected the dog. I guess the dog got loose, and as beagles are wont to do, and ran across the street. And somebody found it and just tied it up there. And for some reason, they had a dog bowl full of water. I don't quite know how the dog got supplied with water. Actually, I also understand somebody had supplied it with some dog food. So, dog's being looked after. I said, I said, if nobody's claiming this dog, this is it's about somewhere between a 5 and 7 year old dog, and very sweet, and her name was Molly. Well, I guess I couldn't name her Zebedee like I planned to name the next male dog, but Molly's okay. Heidi was a good name. Molly's a good name. So all was well that ends well there, and this student guy was fairly prompt about zipping over. So he'd been out looking for the dog. Because some folks aren't that conscientious, particularly in a city setting or a university setting. Delaware's got a fairly well-respected private university, Ohio Wesleyan, and So that was pretty much our adventure today, my adventure today, and I think on that note, I'm going to say bye bye, YouTubers.